Good morning. We are grateful to continue our day of learning with a panel entitled Cause and Effect, Mitigating the Impact of Sexual Assault and Violence Against the LGBTQ community. Remember to take care of yourself, take breaks, and grab snacks as needed. You can see you've got baskets of snacks on the tables and an array of snacks and drinks over here, so please help yourself. Our first panelist is Meghan Buell, the founder and president of TREES, Transgender Resource Education and Enrichment Services. Meghan is a community development professional, educator, and transgender leader locally, regionally, and nationally. She has a bachelor's degree from Eastern Kentucky University in Planning and Community Development and professional certificate in nonprofit leadership and fundraising from the Lilly School of Philanthropy. Our next panelist is Dr. Kelly Faust, an assistant professor of sociology at St. Mary's College. Kelly has a PhD in sociology from Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where her areas of specialization were criminology and gender and feminism. Kelly's latest research includes a survey of the LGBTQ+ community in the greater Michiana area. Kelly identifies as a member of the LGBTQ+ community and volunteers regularly at the Treehouse in downtown South Bend. And our third panelist is Sara Sage of Sage Counseling, LLC. Sara is a therapist in private practice in the South Bend area and is a former associate professor of teacher education with degrees from Western Michigan University, The Ohio State University, and Indiana University. A senior candidate in the Analyst Training Program at the C.G. Jung Institute in Chicago, Sara focuses on depth work for mind, body, and spirit. Sara is a cisgender lesbian, is a longtime advocate in the LGBTQ community in the area, and in her practice specializes in work with queer clients. Our panelists.
We're still kind of deciding who's going to go first. So I will take the lead. Hi, my name is Meghan Buell. My pronouns are she and her. And the bio, I gave them the really short bio. But really what I want to tell you why I'm here is that I have a lot of experience engaging with trans and gender diverse people, not only here in Michiana, but across the country. And in those engagements, there has been a common theme when discussing assaults and violence against them. And so I want to offer some of my experiences hearing from gender diverse people, but also, leading an organization that is connecting to resources that support trans, non-binary, and gender diverse people. What really is the root cause of why we even have to have a day like this here on campus to discuss things? Thinking about trans experiences and how society has set up a lot of barriers and a lot of challenges for a trans person to exist in the world, sometimes we just have to think about the basic hierarchy of needs, right? Needing to belong, to be loved, have a house, a home, well, not even a house, just a home or a roof over your head, food, and violence comes in when somebody, and this is not just a trans or an LGBTQ plus thing, but when you have to trade your safety for one of those hierarchy of needs, that's when you put yourself in harm's way. There's also a lot of myth and stereotypes around gender diverse people, and those can be set up by society, but trust me, trans people are listening, and trans people are believing these things, and they themselves say often things like, well, I deserve to be harmed because I'm different and because I'm gender, non-conforming, so to speak. So there's the myth that they feel this is just part of being trans, and that's not fact. Other things they believe are, I came out as trans, I have good friends, so I'm kind of protected. I don't really face violence because I'm already out and I'm showing the world who I am. I'm not living any secrets anymore. Well, that's a myth as well. There's always danger because society hasn't changed with you, and you have to be cognizant and not be complacent just because you're surrounded by your chosen support. That doesn't mean the whole world is supporting you. Another myth is that gender diverse people feel there are no resources. So why even report? No one's going to believe you anyway. You're the oddball. So who are they going to believe? Well, the trans person thing feels they have no reporting mechanism and they have no way to find resources to support themselves if something were to happen. And that's a myth as well. And you think about the things that put folks in harm's way. Unemployment, homelessness, being hungry, being lonely. And trans people trade their safety for a lot of those things. And that's where the violence comes. And they just expect that to happen. Well, hopefully, with a lot more discussions like we're having here, we can help build a proper culture and set the boundaries for which trans and gender diverse people and LGBTQ people and frankly everybody can live and have access to all those hierarchies and needs without having to sacrifice their safety. The other aspect that plays into this is the lack of state and federal legislation that protects on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. We are still less than half of the states that have any level of protections on that, and so many states do not have any protection. So all those things rolled into one make it very dangerous for gender diverse and LGBTQ people to exist in the world, to try to find and connect to in a loving, supportive, healthy life and a longer life. So when we get to some point where we can do questions and discussion, I am an out and proud transgender woman, and I am a survivor of sexual assault, and I will gladly share any information or any stories for you to better understand. So I will pass this over to one of my colleagues up here. Thank you.
Hello. All right. So I actually teach here at St. Mary's in the sociology and criminology department. I teach a lot of the criminology, all of the criminology classes, and I teach a class that's kind of a borderline crim class that's called Gender and Law. That's a class where we spend quite a bit of time looking at violence against women and members of the LGBTQ+ community. When we look at rates of violence, so there's a myth that domestic violence doesn't occur in the LGBTQ+ community. This, like I said, is a myth. Unfortunately, numbers are as high, if not higher, than in the heterosexual community. Specifically, when we look at certain segments of the population, bisexual females and males experience violence at the highest rates for LGBT. And then when we look at transgender individuals and the rates of violence that they face, we find just sort of shocking numbers. The 2015 transgender survey found that more than half of all respondents experienced some form of intimate partner violence, including acts of coercive control and physical harm. So we're talking about not just a few people in this population, but many. So I also look at because I teach in criminology, I also look at the response to crimes against LGBTQ plus individuals, and a lot of the reasons why we don't look at numbers for reports of these types of crimes is because they are very likely to go unreported. So most of the data that we get about these crimes are from surveys from victims themselves, where they're identifying that they've been through these instances, which ties into so I look at the criminal justice system's response to violence against LGBTQ plus individuals, and then in my research I also look at media representation of violence against LGBTQ plus individuals. And one of the interesting things there is that we are more frequently introduced to LGBTQ plus individuals through violence on television shows and news media. And so that kind of sets the stage for some of the myths that Meghan identified originally. So I guess with that, I'm also here to answer any questions. I too am a survivor, and with that, I'll pass it over to Sara.
Yeah, there's so much we could talk about here this morning. I'm a therapist. I see a lot of clients who have experienced sexual violence, sexual harassment, microaggressions. I'll talk about that in a minute. Sometimes I'm the first person that they've told about it. Sometimes I'm the first person who's believed them. They've told other people who maybe in their family or other people in the community did not believe them that something happened to them. And so, I'm working with people who identify as a variety of genders or not a particular gender who have all experienced sexual violence. But I do think that one of the root causes in our culture of sexual violence is misogyny, which in a very general umbrella sense is really the hatred of women or the feminine. And I think one reason people in the queer community often get targeted for sexual violence is because of misogyny. If you're violating traditional gender norms in how you dress, how you look, how you talk, how you walk, there's a lot of people who feel like the power and control that patriarchy and misogyny gives them the right to harm you, or to project their own fear and hatred of women onto you and then do harm to it. And I don't think we talk about that enough, but I think that's from my perspective, that's a really important concept that kind of underlies a lot of the sexual violence in the queer community. And Meghan and Kelly can speak up and agree or disagree later about that. But just a few things about treatment, about therapy with people who experience sexual violence, or just how to respond if you know someone or you yourself have experienced sexual violence. I think the biggest thing is if someone talks to you, believe what they're telling you. Because it's not terribly common in my experience that people would make this up. It's too hard to talk about it. And if someone is really disclosing sexual violence, so often in families, let's say one parent has done sexual violence to a child or the children in the family, so often the other parent will not believe the child and will protect the parent who is the perpetrator. And that's just such a common dynamic I see in therapy. So if anyone discloses to you, or if you disclose to anyone, I hope that this believing, the default setting should be, let's believe this. I'm going to listen. I'm not going to give you a lot of advice because it's really hard to talk about this. I've had clients for several years in weekly therapy before they've disclosed sexual violence to me. So I think that piece is important. It's also important that people have a way to be safe if they're still being abused or violated, and that is not always clear exactly what that would look like, but I think that's an important thing to be able to talk to people. It's also important to keep it confidential, unless you're in a position where legally you have to disclose. For example, if you're a school counselor and a minor discloses to you that they've been sexually abused, you're going to have to most likely disclose that to authorities. I also think it's really important for therapists to be trauma informed, to understand how any kind of sexual violence can create trauma, and to understand how to work with trauma in general. To understand the various ways that sexual violence impacts people in their lives, and how sometimes people will have a response that relates to their own sexual experience, either not wanting to have anything to do with sex or wanting to do a lot with sex because it feels like sort of reclaiming their power in some way. It may be that people have a real difficulty with wanting to have good sex with a partner because they keep having flashbacks of sexual violence that become very difficult and frustrating to them. And it's important for therapists to be aware of all those and more responses people may have. And it's also important for therapists to understand someone who is from a queer community, particularly, I think needs to go to a therapist, not necessarily who's queer, but who gets being queer enough that you don't have to explain your terminology and sort of bust their myths and stereotypes, so I think that's particularly important. There's a lot else I could say, but I guess one thing that I would say before we maybe open it up for some questions is a lot of my clients don't really identify that they've experienced sexual violence until they talk about it with me, and I help them name it in that way, because sometimes in their family it was kind of the unwritten rule that physical boundaries don't get respected.